The silver band sat heavy in my palm, its inner curve etched with 2 initials, and a date that had nothing to do with me. J+V, July 14, 18. I turned it under the harsh bathroom light, watching the engraving catch the glow as if it were winking, as if the metal itself had been waiting 3 years to laugh in my face. The ring had slipped from Jason's suit pocket when I'd reached for his handkerchief, the same suit he'd worn to our anniversary dinner 2 nights prior, the dinner where he'd toasted to us against the world, while sliding a diamond tennis bracelet onto my wrist with fingers that, apparently, had known the weight of a wedding band for nearly a decade. Outside, rain lashed the windows in rhythmic, accusing bursts, and somewhere in the living room, his phone buzzed with a message from a name I'd never seen. Vivian. I stared at the ring until my vision blurred, until the initials blurred into something that looked less like letters, and more like a question I was terrified to answer. How many times had he undressed in this very room, removing this ring only to tuck it into that same pocket, treating our entire life together like a costume he could shed the second he walked through a different front door? The bracelet on my wrist, his promise of forever, suddenly felt like a shackle, and I realized with a cold, rising certainty that the man sleeping in my bed was not the man I'd fallen in love with. He was a stranger, and I had just found the first clue to who he really was. 3 weeks earlier, I'd woken at 6:47 a.m. to the smell of burnt espresso and Jason humming off-key in the kitchen, sunlight spilling through the linen curtains in warm, honeyed stripes across our bed. I was Camille, 28, a freelance graphic designer who'd built a small but thriving business from the spare bedroom, specializing in brand identities for independent bookstores and artisan coffee roasters. My days were measured in Pantone swatches and client feedback loops, my nights in takeout containers and marathon design sessions fueled by iced oat milk lattes. Jason was 34, a senior project manager at a commercial construction firm, or so he'd said, charming, quick-witted, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order after one date and wrote terrible poetry in the margins of his notebook. We'd met at a design conference mixer 3 years prior, where he'd spilled a glass of Pinot Noir on my portfolio and then spent the next hour convincing me the stain looked like an abstract interpretation of urban decay, somehow turning a disaster into the best first date of my life. We'd moved in together after 8 months, bought a modest house with a backyard big enough for the rescue dog we planned to adopt, and talked about eloping to the coast when the timing felt right. My best friend Lisa, a sharp-tongued real estate agent with a closet full of power blazers and zero tolerance for nonsense, had once joked that Jason was too perfect to be real, but I'd laughed it off, attributing her skepticism to a string of terrible exes. Life felt stable, soft, predictable in the best possible way. I thought I knew every line of Jason's face, every inflection of his voice, every habit and quirk. I was wrong. I didn't know him at all. I slipped the ring back into his pocket before the sun rose, my movements silent, deliberate, as if I were already at war. For the next week, I watched him the way a scientist studies a specimen under glass. Every smile, every hesitation, every late-night work call he took in the hallway with his voice lowered to a conspiratorial murmur. The first crack appeared on Tuesday, when he canceled our dinner plans for the 3rd time that month, claiming a critical site inspection that required his immediate attention. I'd driven past his office building an hour later, the one he'd shown me proudly on our first anniversary, only to find the parking lot dark, the entire floor he claimed to work on shrouded in blackness. He wasn't there. He wasn't at any of the 3 construction sites he'd mentioned in passing over the last year either, all of which I'd looked up in a fugue state of insomnia, their public records showing projects completed months before we'd even met. On Thursday, I found a second phone tucked in the lining of his gym bag, a cheap burner model with a cracked screen, its call log filled with hundreds of entries for the same name, Vivian. The messages were worse. The kids miss you. When are you coming home for good? She still doesn't know, does she? I sank onto the laundry room floor, the cold tile seeping through my sweatpants, and let the truth wash over me in waves of nausea. Jason wasn't just cheating. He was living 2 entire lives. He had a wife. He had children. And for 3 years, I'd been the other woman without ever knowing it. The betrayal wasn't just the infidelity, it was the meticulousness of the lie, the way he'd constructed an entire fake career, fake coworkers, fake work trips, all to keep his 2 worlds from colliding. Every "I love you" had been a performance. Every memory we'd built together had been shared with another woman in a house I'd never seen, in a life I'd never been invited to. The following Monday, he came home with flowers, white peonies, my favorite, and a story about a last-minute schedule change that had forced him to drive 3 hours out of town. I accepted the bouquet with a smile that felt glued to my face, inhaling their sweet scent while wondering how many times he'd brought identical arrangements to another woman's kitchen table. That night, I found a receipt in his wallet for a children's clothing store in a town 40 minutes away, dated the same afternoon he'd claimed to be in a board meeting. On Wednesday, he introduced me to Colton, his business partner, at a casual happy hour, and I watched the way Colton's eyes flickered with something that looked like guilt every time Jason mentioned our future together. Later, in the parking lot, I lingered by Colton's truck long enough to hear him mutter into his phone. "She's starting to ask questions. You need to be more careful." The manipulation escalated after that. When I mentioned driving past his empty office, he turned it around on me, his voice soft with manufactured concern. "Camille, baby, you've been working too hard. You're imagining things. That building has multiple entrances." I was in the back wing. When I asked about the burner phone, having planted it back in his bag after photographing every message, he looked genuinely confused, then concerned, then angry. I've never seen that before. Someone must have planted it. "Are you sure you didn't buy it for a project and forget?" He gaslit me so skillfully that for 48 hours, I actually doubted my own sanity, sitting in my car in the grocery store parking lot and replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I really was just stressed, just tired, just seeing patterns where none existed. The breaking point came at Lisa's birthday party, a casual backyard barbecue with 20 of our closest friends. Jason arrived late, smelling faintly of someone else's lavender perfume, and when I pulled him aside to ask where he'd been, he laughed too loudly and said, "You're being ridiculous, Camille. Everyone's watching. Can't you just have fun for once?" His voice carried just enough for the couple standing nearby to glance over, and in that moment, I saw it clearly. He was publicly framing me as the irrational, jealous girlfriend, turning my very reasonable suspicions into a character flaw. I smiled through the rest of the party, but inside, something hardened. The hurt was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He thought he could outmaneuver me. He thought I was too soft, too in love, too invested in the life we'd built to fight back. He was wrong. If you're feeling this story as much as I felt writing it, if you've ever had that gut punch of realizing someone you trusted was lying to your face, hit the like button so more people who need to see this can find it. Betrayal thrives in silence, and stories like this one remind us we're never alone in the fight to take our power back. I didn't confront him. Confrontation would give him warning, time to lawyer up, time to destroy evidence, time to spin the narrative further. Instead, I became a ghost in my own home. I woke an hour earlier every morning to document everything, photographing receipts, recording phone conversations he thought I couldn't hear, cross-referencing his travel dates with public records. I pulled my savings from our joint account, transferring every dollar to a new bank under my name only, and hired a forensic accountant on a friend's recommendation, a quiet woman named Dana who wore cat-eye glasses and didn't flinch when I told her the full story. What she uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. Over 3 years, Jason had siphoned nearly $70,000 from our shared savings and my business accounts. Money I'd earned from late nights and tight deadlines. Money earmarked for a down payment, for the dog, for the life we'd planned, and funneled it to a joint account held in the names of Jason and Vivian. He'd been using me to fund his other family, paying their mortgage, their children's private school tuition, their family vacations, all while telling me business was slow this quarter. The anger burned white-hot for days, but I didn't act on it. I channeled it. I doubled down on my work, taking on 3 high-paying corporate clients I'd previously turned down for being too corporate, and redesigned my entire brand, leaning into a bolder, more confident aesthetic that reflected the woman I was becoming. I started running every morning at dawn, pushing my body until my lungs burned and my mind cleared, and I took self-defense classes 3 nights a week, not because I feared Jason's violence. He was a coward, not a fighter, but because I wanted to feel strong in my own skin again. The revenge wouldn't be physical. It would be surgical. I would dismantle every lie he'd built, brick by brick, using his own deception against him. I would give him exactly what he deserved. The truth, told at the worst possible moment, in front of the people who mattered most to both versions of his life. And I would make sure he never, ever got to do this to anyone else again. I found Vivian on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting on a weathered wooden bench outside a children's elementary school, waiting for dismissal. She was 32, with warm chestnut hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing a faded cardigan and jeans, holding a stack of student papers. She was a 4th-grade teacher. I'd learned, beloved by parents and students alike. I'd debated for weeks whether to contact her, terrified I'd be dismissed as the other woman, the homewrecker, the villain in her story. But as I watched her stand and wave at 2 small children who came barreling toward her, a boy and a girl with Jason's exact eyes, I knew I couldn't let her live in the dark any longer. I approached her slowly, my hands shaking, and said the only thing I could think of. "I think we need to talk. My name is Camille, and I've been dating your husband for 3 years." The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. She didn't scream. She didn't slap me. She just stared, her face draining of color, as the pieces she'd never known were missing clicked into place. The late nights, the mysterious work trips, the money that always seemed to vanish no matter how carefully she budgeted, the way he always traveled with a separate work suitcase that he kept locked. We sat in her minivan in the school parking lot for 3 hours, comparing timelines, showing each other photographs, realizing with mounting horror that his lies had been perfectly calibrated. He told her he traveled for work, staying in hotels for days at a time, when in reality he'd been at my house. He'd told me he had family obligations, when he'd been at soccer games and parent-teacher conferences. He'd even scheduled our anniversary dinner on the same day as their actual wedding anniversary, splitting the day between both women like a man juggling appointments. The twist wasn't just that he'd had a wife. It was that neither of us had been the priority. We'd both been pawns in a game he'd been playing for nearly a decade, using our love, our trust, our money to maintain the illusion of the perfect man. And in that minivan, surrounded by crayon drawings and half-empty juice boxes, 2 women who should have been enemies became allies. We would take him down together. The annual construction industry, Gala, was the perfect stage. 200 of the region's most influential developers, architects, and investors would be in attendance, along with every major local news outlet covering the Excellence in Building Awards. Jason had been bragging for months that he was a shoo-in for the Rising Star Award, a recognition that would have doubled his salary and cemented his reputation as a leader in the field. What he didn't know was that Colton, his so-called business partner, a man who'd spent 2 years hating himself for keeping the secret, had quietly arranged for Vivian and me to have VIP seats at the table directly in front of the stage. He'd also provided us with the final piece of the puzzle, Jason wasn't just a liar and a bigamist. He'd been falsifying inspection reports and cutting corners on materials for years, putting the safety of hundreds of people at risk in exchange for kickbacks he'd used to fund his double life. The gala unfolded in a blur of champagne flutes and forced laughter. Jason looked immaculate in his tailored tuxedo, smiling and shaking hands, completely unaware that the two women whose lives he destroyed were sitting 10 feet away, watching him with identical expressions of cold resolve. When the presenter called his name for the Rising Star Award, the room erupted in polite applause. He walked to the stage with his signature confident stride, adjusted the microphone, and began his acceptance speech, thanking my beautiful partner Camille, who has supported every step of this journey. That was our cue. Vivian stood first, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent ballroom. Actually, Jason, I'm Vivian, your wife of 8 years. And this is Camille, the woman you've been living with for 3. The room went dead quiet. Jason's face went white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I stood next, opening the binder I'd brought with me and projecting the contents onto the massive screen behind the stage, bank records showing the embezzlement, text messages proving the double life. Inspection reports Colton had leaked showing structural failures in 3 of Jason's award-winning buildings. One by one, we laid out the truth, our voices calm, our evidence irrefutable. We didn't yell. We didn't call names. We just told the story, every carefully documented detail, until the man on stage was stripped bare of every lie he'd ever told. By the time we finished, the room was buzzing with whispers, cameras were flashing, and the award presenter had stepped away from the podium in disgust. Jason tried to speak, to defend himself, to spin it one more time, but there was nothing left to say. The truth was on the screen for everyone to see. His career was over. His reputation was in ruins. And for the first time in 8 years, both of his worlds had collided exactly where he could no longer control them. This is the moment we all wait for, the second when every lie finally collapses under its own weight. If you're still here watching this unfold with me, take 1 second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've got more stories of justice reclaimed, and you won't want to miss the next one. The fallout was swift and total. The construction firm fired Jason within an hour of the gala, and multiple clients filed lawsuits alleging fraud and negligence. The district attorney opened a criminal investigation into the falsified inspections, and the state licensing board revoked his professional credentials permanently. He lost the house he shared with Vivian to foreclosure, the bank calling in the mortgage the second his income vanished, and within 3 months, he was living in a cheap studio apartment across town, working odd construction jobs under the table because no reputable firm would hire him. He tried to call me once, sobbing and begging for forgiveness, claiming he'd loved us both in different ways, but I blocked his number without listening to the message. I didn't owe him anything. Not my time, not my pity, not even my anger. Vivian fared better. With Colton's help, he'd left the firm to start his own honest company and had offered her a position as office manager. She rebuilt her finances, kept the children in their school, and slowly began to heal. We became friends, in the way only 2 people who have survived the same hurricane can, meeting for coffee every other week to watch the kids play in the park and talk about the futures we were building for ourselves. For me, that future meant expanding my design studio into a small collective, hiring 3 other female designers, and specializing in branding for women-owned businesses. I kept the house, refinancing it in my name only, and finally adopted the rescue dog we'd talked about, a scruffy terrier mix named Mabel, who slept at the foot of my bed and thought every squirrel was a personal enemy. I dated casually, slowly, learning to trust my gut again, and while I wasn't in a hurry to fall in love, I found myself open to the possibility in a way I hadn't thought possible. The money Jason stole was never fully recovered, but I didn't care. I'd earned back more than enough through my work, and the lesson had been worth the price. That I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for, that I could survive the worst betrayal imaginable and come out the other side not broken, but better. A year to the day after I found that ring in his pocket, I sat on my back porch at dusk, Mabel curled at my feet, watching fireflies blink to life in the tall grass at the edge of the yard. I still had the diamond tennis bracelet, tucked away in the back of my jewelry box, not as a reminder of him, but as a reminder of me. Of the woman I'd been, naive and trusting and willing to give everything to someone who didn't deserve it, and of the woman I'd become, sharp and resilient and unapologetic about protecting her own heart. People often ask me if I regret what I did, if the revenge was worth the cost, if I ever feel guilty for the way his life imploded. The answer is no. I didn't destroy Jason. He destroyed himself, one lie at a time, one choice at a time, over the course of a decade. Vivian and I simply turned on the light. The cost of vengeance, I've learned, isn't what you take from someone else. It's what you carry with you afterward, the weight of the anger, the temptation to let bitterness become your default setting, the quiet fear that you'll never be able to trust again. But that cost is optional. You can choose to set it down. You can choose to heal. You can choose to take the worst thing that ever happened to you and turn it into the foundation of something better. Lies have a way of unraveling eventually. The truth always finds its way to the surface, often in the most unexpected ways, at the most inconvenient moments for the people who have buried it. And as for hidden relationships, they're never as hidden as the people in them like to believe. Someone always knows. Someone always sees. And sooner or later, the wife you thought you'd hidden forever and the girlfriend you thought you could string along might just decide to stop playing your game and start writing their own rules. And one last thing, if this story resonated with you, if it made you think of someone who needs to hear it, please share it with them. You never know who's sitting in a bathroom right now holding a ring that doesn't belong, wondering if they're strong enough to walk away. They are. And this story is for them. The shift ends, but the stories never do. Every smile hides a struggle, every word a story. Hit subscribe and see the human side of work. Thank you for watching.